Hi, this is Kim from Read It Again Bookstore, and today I'm with author Kristine F. Anderson. Hey, how's it going, Kristine?
Good, Kim. How are you?
Good. What does the F stand for?
Fantastic.
Fantastic. I love it. Okay, so Kristine wrote Crooked Truth, which I finished today, and guys, I really like this one. It was really good. It's a historical novel, but I'm going to let her tell you that. Actually, Kristine, before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I will tell you, first of all, that I really am an introvert, like most writers. And that's why most writers write, because they are introverts.
Oh, don't worry about it. It's just me and you in this room right now. So that is all. So tell me, not the people out there, but me about yourself.
Okay. I have a background as an English teacher. I spent a long time doing freelance work, newspaper work primarily, and some magazine work. I worked as what we call a stringer, which means it's an old term for somebody who is a satellite reporter for the Christian Science Monitor. And I didn't make any money, but it was a great job because I got to meet a lot of interesting people. I got to go a lot of unusual.
Audio's going in and out. Kristine, we can't hear you, or at least I can't hear you.
Okay.
Oh, I can hear you. I think you have to lean forward.
All righty.
Really intimate with your computer. Yeah.
Okay.
Last I heard is you interviewed people.
Right. I interviewed a lot of people in a lot of different places and enjoyed it. Very much enjoyed that.
What was one of the most interesting places you went to for an interview?
I went to a homeless camp down off Memorial Drive, and I'm not even sure where it is now. But it was really hidden, even though it was in the midst of a very congested area.
Yeah.
And the only reason I could find it was because I actually went with someone who was living in the camp.
Interesting.
He was my guide.
So, and you told me you went to visit prisons too?
A couple of stories on prisons, one on the Atlanta Penitentiary down by the zoo. I did a story on a work farm, a couple of stories on work farms out in Cobb County.
Well, while you were doing that, you had to have come up with some really great ideas for novels. Is that where you got the idea for Crooked Truth?
No, the idea for Crooked Truth actually came from a family story. And I think we're story creatures. We're wired for story. We're addicted to story. Stories are who we are. They're part of our identity. And we went to a family cookout for Labor Day. We always go to this cookout down in South Georgia, where my husband has lots of cousins. It was down in Sumter County.
Yeah.
While we were there, we were sitting with one of his older relatives, and he told us a story about a couple who had both been widowed, and they both had children from their first marriages, grown children. Well, they married. She was in her late 40s. He was in his 50s. Had a son, but the son was born a mongoloid. This was long before they used the term Down syndrome. And he was a sweet boy, but he was very limited. Couldn't tie his shoes. He couldn't recite his ABCs. He was very difficult to understand. And of course, back in the 30s, they didn't have any kind of classes for people who are mongoloid. They kind of kept them tucked away. And a lot of people were afraid of him because he grew to become a big, hulking guy. although his mother said he would never hurt a flea.
Mm-hmm.
And his older brother was a half-brother, abused and bullied him.
Mm.
He had him doing all the heavy work on the farm because he was a big guy. And when their father died, the abuse and the bullying got even worse.
Mm.
And things escalated, and one day they blew up. And I won't say anything else, but I was so taken in by the story,
Mm-hmm.
I started making notes at the barbecue. And when I was cleaning earlier during the quarantine, I came across the napkins I actually made notes on about this family story. And the story really resonated with me because at that point, I had also been working with a little boy who had Down syndrome. And like the boy in the family story, he was very limited.
Mm-hmm.
But he went to school and he was not bullied, he was not abused.
Mm-hmm.
His situation was very different from the boy in the family story. And he got along with the kids.
Without giving anything away, what were the differences? Like, what did you add to the book so it became more your story than a family story?
I included the narrator, who was the 15-year-old boy, Lucas. And the story is told primarily from his point of view because he becomes the unwilling caretaker for this mongoloid uncle.
Mm-hmm.
And he resents that, and he resents the uncle.
But
They
it's still
share a bedroom, and the uncle sticks.
Here, lean forward again. You there?
I'm here.
There we go. There you are. So let's see. We were going to do a reading. Actually, we have a special guest to do a reading today.
Yes.
Tell us about your special guest.
Okay. Special guest is none other than my husband, Heroine. Had a long career teaching and coaching. So he has learned how to project. And he is a great reader with a real Southern accent.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to read a selection from chapter 2. And in this chapter, you'll meet all the major characters. You meet Lucas, the narrator, Robert, the Mongoloid, the half-brother who's so abusive,
Mm-hmm.
Alvin Earl, and Lucas's grandparents, who are Robert's parents.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all together on a Saturday night as Robert sings. So here's Hewlin.
Hello, I am going to read a few lines from Kristine's book, and it's an honor to do this. As we sang, I heard Alvin Earl come in the back door and poke around the kitchen, searching for some leftover supper. When he couldn't find anything to eat, he came into the parlor and leaned against the wall. He wore a starched white shirt, and his shoes had more polish on them than Granny's piano. He'd slicked back his hair to hide his bald spot, and I could smell the vitalics from across the room. A little dab of toilet paper clung to his chin, soaking up the blood from a shaving nick, and he had a cigarette stuck behind his ear. Granny droned on, and I heard a deep voice on the radio announcing tonight's episode of Mystery Theater. Fixing my eyes on the mantel clock, I slowly inched toward the kitchen, eager to make my escape. Robert, enjoying an audience, started another round of Clementine and swayed to the music. He had a high, sweet voice. A little bubbles of spit popped up on his lip when he sang. and he always got the words mixed up. After he finished the last line, Alvin Earl clapped and asked, "You can train a monkey or a dog to do tricks. Which one is he?" Granny jerked her pale fingers off the keys and froze. Alvin Earl's question hung in the air like a bad note, and silence filled the room. When no one answered, he asked again, "Is he a trained monkey or a circus dog doing tricks?" Glancing at Robert, I knew he didn't catch the sarcasm in Alvin Earl's voice or even understand the question. He thought it was funny and laughed. "I'm not a monkey. I'm not a dog. I'm your brother. I don't get a word he's saying. He talks like he's got a mouthful of grits." Pulling out his lighter with his one-eyed Jack insignia, he flipped the top open. Then he spun the little rubber wheel around with his thumb. Robert stared at the silver lighter, and Granny frowned.
Good job. So, you were talking about the book. Where did we leave off? We were talking about the differences between your family story and your book, and you have your narrator Lucas and the sweet man who doesn't understand what's going on. What got me when I was reading it was like him hiding the chicken in his bed because he couldn't say goodbye to the dead chicken. And then when his father goes off to heaven, I'm not giving anything away. It says it on the back of the book. He treated it like he just went to Atlanta. So, where did you pull inspiration for these characters besides your family story?
I had worked with this boy.
Oh yeah, you told me that. Yeah, but what about Luca?
Elementary school,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized that I needed a narrator, and I have two boys of my own who were just finishing up their teen years as I started writing this book. So there was a lot of testosterone floating around our house.
How long did it take you to write this? This is your first novel, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It took about 4 years because I had several endings. This is actually the third ending. And at one time, the book also had a different title.
Oh.
But when I changed the ending, I realized I needed to change the title.
And I love the cover. Did you have any say in that?
I got the barbed wire fence.
Because it's gorgeous. It's a really nice cover. And I see on the cover that you won the Ferrol Sams Award for fiction.
Right.
So what is that? Well, I know who Ferrol Sams is, but can you tell us about the award?
Daryl Sams was a Mercer grad. He went to Mercer for his undergraduate, and then he went to Emory for medical school. And he practiced medicine with his wife in Fayetteville for about close to 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And because he had this connection with Mercer, and he also, in his mid-50s, he started writing autobiographical stories about his youth. And his most famous book is probably Run with the Horseman.
Yep.
But Mercer named an award for him, a fiction award, for the work that best exemplifies or shows life in the Southern context. And I had worked on the book. I didn't have an agent. I'd sent out queries, but I didn't have much luck. Some people said, send me the first chapter. Some people said, send me the first 5 chapters, but nobody said, I want to represent you. I can sell this book.
Mm-hmm.
Send me the whole book. But Mercer has a contest. They were holding every year for about 6 or 7 years, and it's the Ferrol Sams Fiction Award. So I literally bundled up my manuscript and rushed over to the FedEx and sent my manuscript down to Macon at the 11th hour to enter this contest. And then I prayed, I offered candles, I offered one of my children. And finally, 6 months later, I heard from the editor at Mercer, and he said, we selected Crooked Truth as our winner. And I was thrilled because it was the first book I've ever written. So I never had an agent, but I got a contract. And that little insignia on the corner of the book is for the Ferrol Sams Fiction Award.
So what was it like to write a book? I mean, is this something you've always wanted to do?
I had thought about it when I was doing articles, thinking I'd like to do something more in depth. But I had finished my teaching career. I had some time. I had this story rolling around in my head, and everything seemed lined up. It was a good time to start writing.
Are you working on anything else now?
I have a follow-up to Crooked Truth, and that will involve Lucas and his friend Cotton, who heads north to play Major League Baseball with the team in Cleveland, Ohio. And then there is another character who is also a former baseball player, but his career is ended when he gets hit in the face with a fly ball and he loses one of his eyes. So he becomes the one-eyed creature. And he and Lucas and Cotton and, well, his name is William, the three of them get involved in some early civil rights activities.
Lewis wants to know, did you have beta readers for Get Initial Feedback?
Yes, I was in a writing group. I submitted the early chapters for critiques at conferences. I went to workshops.
Good.
So,
it helped?
yes.
Yeah.
Writing a news article or a magazine article is very different from writing a book, especially fiction.
Yeah.
Because you have to create a world, a setting. You're creating a storyline and characters. It's almost like you're creating your own little community.
So race is a big issue in the book. Was that difficult to write? Because there's some scenes in there that were difficult to read. I mean, it's not that they're poorly written. It was just emotional.
I enjoy writing dialogue. And in some ways, writing dialogue is much easier for me than writing description. So the race scenes, some of them were uncomfortable because of what was happening or what had happened. But I did some research for the book. And we made a trip to Montgomery to see the lynching museum. A lot of interviews. So I felt like I was prepared.
Yeah. We got a question. Did you make a map of your town?
Have that map hanging on my wall. It's kind of a bird's eye view of the farm and then the road leading into the little community, Crisscross. And then a map of the schools and the businesses and the churches in Crisscross.
Is Crisscross based on a town? Or did it all come out of your head?
Cross was kind of a play on the title, Crooked Truth, but also it was crisscross because two railways go through the town and they meet. And that was just a fictitious choice.
Mm-hmm. My mom lived in a town called Sugar Hill because the train had an accident and it was carrying sugar, and all the sugar fell all over the main hill. So they call it Sugar Hill. That's my
Great story.
Yeah.
When was that, Kim?
I don't know. That was just what I remember when they moved from Florida to Georgia. And I kept saying, that is the most Southern sounding town I've ever heard. Sugar Hill. Yeah.
Right there.
We got another question. How has your writing style changed during the pandemic?
In some ways, the pandemic has been a big plus because fewer distractions. It's a good time to really sit down and focus on writing a book.
Have you gotten a lot of work done during the pandemic?
A good bit done.
Yeah.
I've gotten a lot of research done, which I really needed to do before I started to do the writing.
Very cool. Very cool. Let's see what my other questions were. Oh, you wanted to, let's get to the part in our conversation where the author plays bookseller. Did you want to recommend a couple titles?
Yes. Okay, for all those wannabe writers out there, I would recommend the monthly magazine called the Writer's Digest, and your local library carries that, and you may have that too, Kim. Writer's Digest.
And no, we don't carry any magazines. I have the other books that you sent me that I misspelled there, but that's okay. We don't carry magazines, but we have lots of libraries around here to get it. Or they may have their periodicals online so that you can read it there.
Magazine I would recommend is called Writer's Digest. And that just has a lot of different information, including lists of agents and publishers. And then the other thing I would recommend is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. This is kind of a classic, very readable. And the other I would recommend is Stephen King's On Writing. And this is like Anne Lamott's. This is written in first person, a lot of information about his life as a young boy. He grew up with an older brother, and his mother pretty much raised the both of them. And his early efforts to get started as a writer. And one of the most interesting things he says is that he starts a book with a situation, and then he pulls in characters, and the characters develop and evolve as he continues to write, and then he gets into the narration.
I've never read it. We sell it all the time. They assign it locally in schools.
But I think a lot of times Stephen King is typed as a horror writer, but I think he's really very versatile.
Well, he wrote
a lot of things.
Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption. Those were him. So we got some more questions. Let's see here. Sharon says, Kristine, I enjoyed reading your book. Very descriptive. I feel like I'm standing in the scene. That's really nice. Lean forward a little bit.
I especially appreciate that because I know Sharon has moved here from New York. So to have her say that she feels like she's standing in the scene is a real compliment.
We also have a question. Ignore the phone. How do you research?
Depends what kind of research I'm doing. Some research I can do online. Some research involved travel trips. We actually went to the county seat in Stewart County to see if we could find any family records from this family story we heard. As I said, we went to the lynching museum in Montgomery. And then I would talk with people, and I always have a paper and pencil with me, and would talk with people, eavesdropped on conversations to make sure my dialogue was on point.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of always researching.
And I'm putting a link in the comments to the museum and memorial for the lynching museum.
In Montgomery.
Montgomery. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Maybe virtually visit on their website right now and make a plan for a year or two. We got another question. How did you come up with the names for your characters? Lean forward.
I chose because Lucas comes from the word to illuminate, to light, to make light. And he is trying to figure out how to deal with a very difficult situation, which later involves the sheriff and local authorities. So Lucas came from light. Alvin Earl was a good Southern name. Robert for the Down syndrome uncle. But some of my names changed when I made the revisions. My main character was originally Joey, but I felt I needed to have a narrator who was a little older, more mature.
Is there people you know who you named as characters in the book?
No, but there were some people in the family who had characteristics similar to people in the book. And I'm glad my mother isn't here to hear that, because some of those characteristics were very unpleasant and at times
All right. Well, we're coming to the end of this. Does anybody else have any more questions? I highly recommend this book. We actually have a decent sized audience tonight, so I know they either read it or they plan on reading it. I had a gentleman, I don't know if he's watching, but he called earlier and wanted to know how many copies of the book I could get for him. So that's exciting. So have you had good response?
yes.
Yeah?
Because the book did not have what we call advanced reader copies, so there was very little pre-release publicity. But comments I've gotten from readers have been very strong.
That's awesome.
And a lot of people have said, once I start it, I can't put it down. And the pacing was something I was very conscious of as I was writing, because I think people today, especially teens, read differently than they did in the past. Well, they want a story that's fast moving.
I have to say, I enjoyed that it was shorter, because I love condensed books that say a lot in less words. You know, the book could be this big and only this amount of stuff happens. So why not make it this big? Although I know it's harder, right, as a writer, to have a more condensed book that is equally as good as a fat book.
I think that's where the newspaper experience really helped, because when you're writing for a newspaper, you learn to write tight and consider your column space.
So we have another question here. Would you ever write a book about a female heroine?
If I had a good story and situation.
Sounds like you've been collecting stories for a long time, so I'm sure there's something in there.
There will be, but I want to finish my current book.
What's the difference between writing your first book and the book you're writing now?
One is the time period.
Mm-hmm.
My next book will take place in the early 60s, and it's going to take place both in the Deep South and the Midwest in the Cleveland, Ohio area. So
And
the locale will
go
be
ahead.
different.
So, and what was it like? Like, is it easier to write your second book than it was to write your first one?
Some ways it has been easier.
Yeah.
But it's, I think, required more research because of the civil rights activities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, talking about beta readers, have you looked into doing oh goodness, I'm not going to remember it. Sensitivity readers.
I may when I get to that point.
I only just found out about that within the last year, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. I would love to talk to. If there's a sensitivity reader watching this, I would love to interview because I just think that is a fascinating job. Absolutely. So everybody, you should go out and buy Crooked Truth. Thank you, Kristine, for joining us. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I really enjoyed your book. And I read a lot of books, and I like this one. So, lean forward.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to all the folks for tuning in on a Saturday night. I appreciate that.
I hope everybody's sitting back with their glass of wine or beer. Kristine, you don't live too far from here, so the next time you're in town, you should stop by and sign some stock for us. You have to wear a mask. Yeah, and we have an autograph wall you can sign too. Definitely. Okay, guys, so we're going to call it a night. Thank you for everybody joining us. Please buy copies of Crooked Truth. You don't have to buy them from us, but please support your local independent bookstore. If that's not Read It Again, that's okay. We prefer you come buy them from us, but we'll understand if you support another indie. We have some in stock, and at some point, Kristine will come and autograph them. So when you order them, tell us who you wanted to autograph to. Well, anyway, good night, guys. Thank you.